So welcome to part 2 of my book haul, my end of 2021, November, December book haul that I'm filming in January of 2022. So in part 1, I covered books that I was given by my neighbor, as well as books that I got from Barnes & Noble during their Black Friday sale. And so in this portion, I'm going to be covering some books I got from my local bookstore, as well as some books I got from Book Outlet. So I'm going to start with the books I got from my local bookstore. So the first book I got was Damien by Herman Hesse. And if you watched the part 1 of this video, then you know that I was given The Journey to the East by my neighbor, and I decided that I want to read his works in order, or at least all the works that I want to read from him, his most kind of popular works, in order first, and then maybe I'll go back and read even more. But this is what I decided I want my first Hesse book to be. So I went ahead and I purchased this from my local bookstore, and I really love this version. I really love the graphic design of the quote within the egg, mirroring the front. So I'm going to read a little bit from the back. An acclaimed, influential, and visionary novel from one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, Damien by Herman Hesse tells the dramatic story of Emile Sinclair. Docile and unquestioning, Emile follows a precocious schoolmate, the charismatic Max Damien, on a shocking descent into a secret and dangerous world of petty crime and revolt against convention. And it is there in the shadows that a formerly complacent and uncomplicated young man achieves a miraculous awakening of selfhood. So I'm really excited for this book, and I think, in fact, that this is probably going to be the next fiction book that I read. I'm currently reading, or just started reading, a couple fiction books. But I think that that is going to be the next fiction book that I'm going to read. The next book from my local bookstore is The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And this book is by Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Really deals with how the body stores trauma. And so it is a, scientific book, psychology, science, self-help in many ways. And so I've just started it. But so far, I think that it is really an interesting read and helpful when it comes to my own past. I originally actually purchased this as an audiobook, but found right away that sometimes this book references images and things of that nature, and I just found that it would be best if I really had a physical copy. And I'm glad that I did, because there are diagrams as well as images within this book that, here's an example, and it would be hard listening to this in audiobook and then having to refer to the images. I don't know, I just decided that it would be best that I could have a physical copy, and that way I could also go through and underline, which is something I like to do in books. I know that that's probably not everyone is into that, but when it comes to nonfiction books, I almost always underline and write in the actual book. When it comes to fiction, I tend to, if there's a quote I like, I just write it down in a notebook or my phone. Okay, so the next two things I got are self-help workbooks. So this next one is the Mindfulness and Acceptance Workbook for Self-Esteem, using acceptance and commitment therapy to move beyond negative self-talk and embrace self-compassion. And so I am a big fan of self-help workbooks, because I find that if you cannot afford traditional therapy, that these can be a great alternative. Of course, in many ways, there's no true alternative to, the knowledge and education, background, specialization of an actual therapist talking to you about your specific issues. But however, therapy is very expensive. And so recently I had to actually discontinue my therapy because I could no longer afford it. And so because of that, I am reading a lot of like self-help, self-development type books, as well as doing these workbooks, and also listening to like mental health podcasts as kind of my substitute for therapy. And so this book I have started, and I personally am a huge proponent of the ACT model of therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. I would love to do a whole video on that if anyone is interested, but basically most people are pretty familiar with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and kind of my understanding is at its base, the concept of CBT therapy is to take a negative thought like I hate myself and turn it on its head and turn it into a positive thought like I love myself. And so you kind of catch that thought and you think, I hate myself. No, I love myself. And you tell yourself, I love myself, as a way to kind of restructure your thought patterns. Where ACT is a little different in that if you have a negative thought like I hate myself, it's more like meditation where you observe that thought and you think, how interesting, and you don't let it affect you. So if you have the thought of I hate myself, you would think, right now I'm thinking I hate myself. And then you would kind of just diffuse that thought. You kind of just let that thought pass, and you don't let that thought kind of affect your emotional well-being. There's light coming in, reflecting on my face from, I don't even know what, maybe from my lamp. But that is kind of the premise, the most basic understanding I could give you of ACT therapy, because the argument is that when you kind of try to restructure a thought like that and go from I hate myself to I love myself, your brain is kind of dwelling on the whole concept of your own self-hatred, where ACT, you're just accepting that it's just a thought and you're just letting it pass and you're not giving it any weight. And so I find that for myself, for the most part, ACT therapy is actually more beneficial to me than CBT therapy. And so that is why I sought out some workbooks that specifically talked about, were specifically like ACT workbooks. So yeah, and like I said, I've just started this. I've like one chapter in, and I think it's gonna be a really good workbook. So I also, from my local bookstore, got the ACT workbook for depression and shame. Overcome thoughts of defectiveness and increase well-being using acceptance and commitment therapy. And so I'm really excited to also do this workbook, but I'm thinking about, I don't know if I want to do this at the same time as the one I'm working on, or if I want to wait until I finish that one to start this one. But I'm really excited to start this book as well. Kind of some of the chapters include your defectiveness schema, assessment, defectiveness, coping behaviors, from avoidance to acceptance, mindfulness, values, diffusion, avoidance and exposure, facing your shame and sadness, self-compassion, relapse prevention, worksheets, and then the rest is just like the appendix. But I'm really excited. I should have read the table of contents for the other workbook, the mindfulness and acceptance workbook for self-esteem. So it has part 1, making sense of self-esteem, and then part 2, the self-care starting point, and then part 3, 6 steps to self-acceptance, which includes tuning in, noticing who is noticing, making room, catching comparisons, learning the art of self-acceptance, working out what matters, and making bold moves. So I'm really excited, and wow, the lighting is like really going crazy because this is the light coming through my lamp that's sitting on my windowsill. It's really creating a kind of crazy light effect. Hopefully that's not super distracting. Now on to my book outlet books. So book outlet is like my guilty pleasure. I give them way too much of my money. Whenever I get paid, it's like might as well just take a portion of my paycheck and send it directly to book outlet because I love book outlet. If you're not familiar with book outlet, it's basically an online like bargain book website. I will link below a link where you can like sign up. I'm sure that they have some sort of affiliate link program that I can maybe figure out how like maybe you can get a credit, I get a credit, everyone's happy. But I love book outlet so much. You can find some really, really good deals there, and that's a lot of the books that I own are from book outlet. But they are bargain books, so they're not in like the perfect condition that a book from say Barnes & Noble would be in. Instead they may, you know, be a little bit not used, but you know, the cover may be creased, or you know, there may be some like markings on the cover, and they all have a dot on the pages that represents that it's a bargain book, and that way it can't be like returned to the bookstore as like a damaged book. It means that it's already like, you know, a bargain book. Also, a lot of times bargain books are just overstock from publishers, so a lot of times, you know, a publisher may order too many books, or you know, blah blah blah. Okay, I don't need to get into the whole explanation of bargain books, but basically the first book that I got, I'm so excited. It is a sticker book of plant stickers, over 400 illustrated stickers. And I am so excited because these are like some really gorgeous stickers. Sorry that the lighting's weird, but there's like mushrooms, so many different mushrooms and flowers, and I think that these would be so great in, you know, a journal or a collage. I'm really excited to use these stickers. And my biggest problem with stickers is I'm like, they're all so pretty that I like don't even want to use them because they're so nice. But I'm really excited. I forget how much this costs, but the full price is $10. I think I want to say that I paid like $4 for it. So that's what I like about book outlet, is you get really good deals. So the rest of the books that I got are all like nonfiction, so I'm just gonna start at the top of the pile. So this is Tell My Horse by Zora Neale Hurston, and this is Voodoo and Life in Haiti and Jamaica. I really love the cover, and I love the back cover as well. And so she's most known for her book Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is a fiction, and I read it in high school, and that was my first introduction into Zora Neale Hurston. And then I actually went to the festival dedicated to her in Eatonville, Florida when I was in high school, and she, besides being just an author, was an anthropologist, and so this is one of her more anthropological based texts. And for a long time I've wanted to read this book, and I was really happy when I found it on Book Outlet. And I really, really love like this cover in this edition. I think it's really beautiful, especially. And so I took a class in college called Magic, Religion, and Witchcraft. And in this class we had a small unit on like voodoo, zombies, and and it's just fascinating to me. You know, I have family from Miami, and if you've ever been to Miami, then you know there's Little Haiti. There's a lot of voodoo shops, and I'm just very interested in that whole realm. Anything, you know, involving folklore, mythology, any of I just am very interested in that. Religions of all sorts, rituals, just all of that. Very interesting to me, and so I'm really excited to read this book. I'm really excited. The next book I got is by Robert Bly, and it is More Than True, The Wisdom of Fairy Tales. And so if you saw the first part of this video, I talked about Iron John and how my neighbor recommended Iron John by Robert Bly. So I searched Robert Bly on Book Outlet, hoping to find Iron John on Book Outlet. And they did not have it, but they had this book. And it seemed to be interesting to me because of my interest in fairy tales, folklore, mythology, archetypes, all of that. I thought this could be an interesting read. And so, Robert Bly revisits a selection of fairy tales and examines how these enduring narratives capture the essence of human nature. So there's 6 different tales that he looks through and works through. And there's illustrations that accompany each one. So that's the illustration. And so I am excited to read this. And it's just a thin little book. And, you know, I think that thin books are underrated. That people kind of find, a lot of people, there is something magnificent about reading a thick book and then you finish it and you just feel so accomplished. But I think there's something really great about, as my neighbor says, books that are brief but brilliant. I think there's something to that. And so sometimes we can overlook books that seem very thin, but really there is really something to a book that is brief but brilliant. So the next book is also a thin little book, and this is The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating by Elizabeth Tova Bailey. I first heard about this book on, I believe on Reddit. There's a subreddit called Book Suggestions, and I really recommend that. If you are looking for book suggestions, you can post kind of what you're looking for, or you can kind of search through and see in the past what other people have recommended from different, prompts and such. But this, I don't even know what the topic or prompt was, but I remember someone recommended this book and I looked it up and I immediately felt like it could be interesting. So, in a work that beautifully demonstrates the rewards of closely observing nature, Elizabeth Tova Bailey shares an inspiring and intimate story of her encounter with the Neohelix albolabris, a common woodland snail. While an illness keeps her bedridden, Bailey watches a wild snail that has taken up residence on her nightstand. As a result, she discovers the solace and sense of wonder that this mysterious creature brings and comes to a greater understanding of her own place in the world. Intrigued by the snail's molluscan anatomy, cryptic defenses, clear decision-making, hydraulic locomotion, and courtship activities, Bailey becomes an astute and amused observer, offering a candid and engaging look into the curious life of this underappreciated small animal. The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating is a remarkable journey of survival and resilience, showing us how a small part of the natural world can eliminate our own human existence while providing an appreciation of what it means to be fully alive. And so, it's just a small book. What I love is there's little illustrations of snails throughout. And so I'm excited. Lately, I've been kind of getting into books that deal with nature. So if you have any recommendations for books that kind of talk about nature, kind of specifically the therapeutic applications of nature into one's life, but in more from like a autobiographical sense, let me know. So the next book, Nietzsche, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I can never pronounce that. A book for none and all. Nietzsche. I've never read Nietzsche. I've not read a lot of philosophy, but philosophy has always been something that I've been interested in. And of course, I feel like this is a classic. This is definitely on the list of books that I want to pick up and read very soon. Also, when it comes to works that are philosophical, scientific, or dense, such as like the quantum physics book I showed and that book, reading is not a rush, and I think that with booktube culture, there's this sense that like this drive to finish so many books in a month and to read like 100 books a year and be reading, multiple books a month and finishing books and reviewing them and just reading a book in 24 hours and all of this. And I think that, if you're reading fiction for just entertainment, I think that that's fine, but that reading is meant to be enjoyable and or educational. And so for me, I think putting those pressures on yourself is not always healthy. So I prefer to read multiple books at once and just take it slow, even if that means reading just 2 pages of a certain book a day. I prefer to allow myself to fully absorb everything in the book and fully absorb the concepts versus just trying to read through it as fast as possible. And so that's why I don't feel the need to read just one book at a time and just plow through books. I think there's really something to reading little bits of multiple books at once. So the next book, second to last book of my haul, is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown, and this is an Indian history of the American West. So this was recommended to me by a history professor I had in college, and he actually tried to give me a copy of this book, and I declined because at the time I was going to borrow the audiobook version from the library. But I've since realized that when it comes to a lot of like history books, I prefer to have a physical copy and slowly read it versus if I check out an audiobook from the library, I have only 14 days to listen to it. And well, some audiobooks I can listen to in a day or two. When it comes to something that's really telling such a large story, I'd rather have an actual copy of the book and be able to underline and to be able to look at any images. And so that is why I used to really listen to more books than I physically read books, but lately I've been getting back into the act of physically reading versus listening to audiobooks because I feel like there is something in the way that you absorb information reading versus listening. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love audiobooks so much, and I think when it comes to a lot of books like biographies, certain fiction, like self-development and like so many different topics, I think audiobooks are awesome. But I've just found from personal experience that there's some books that I would just rather physically read than listen to. But at the same time, with my lifestyle and kind of the way my schedule is, sometimes I don't have time to physically read. And so I love that audiobooks give me the option to read. And when I'm not feeling well physically or mentally, sometimes I don't have the energy to sit and read a book, where I can just lay in my bed with my eyes closed and listen to an audiobook. And so, I do think that audiobooks are really, really great. And I'm glad that I feel like in the past few years, I don't know if I've just become more aware of audiobooks in the world of audiobooks, or if the world at large has become more aware, because I feel like it's a lot more like socially acceptable and a lot more normalized to listen to audiobooks now. And pretty much every single book that's been published, there's just so many audiobooks out there now, and I think that's really cool. So the last book of my haul is a book that I found through Lana Del Rey. So YouTuber Carly Thorne has a series in which she reads a celebrity's favorite books. And so she's done this for like Harry Styles and a bunch of celebrities that I don't even know, because I'm really not up to date with a lot of modern pop culture, especially like Gen Z type stuff, because I am in my like mid-20s. And so a lot of this, like the stuff that like the 18 and 19-year-olds are into, I'm already feel like I'm too old and I have no clue what anyone's talking about. But I really enjoy that series where she reads a celebrity's favorite books, and she's a comedian, and it's just very funny, great videos. I'll link her channel below if you haven't already discovered it. But I thought I would love to do a video like that, but with Lana Del Rey. So like reading Lana Del Rey's favorite books or any books that she's recommended. I thought that would be so fun. And so I started looking up lists, and I kind of made a list of books. And you know, I'm not a YouTuber. Like, yeah, this is a YouTube video, but I don't know. I just don't feel comfortable enough on camera to make like a full video about it. I would maybe consider making an ASMR video, like talking about Lana Del Rey's favorite books, but first I have to read them all. So one that I discovered was Wayne Dyer's Your Erroneous Zones. So this is step-by-step advice for escaping the trap of negative thinking and taking control of your life. So this is like a self-help book, and it's highly popular. It's a highly popular book, and I believe that he's written tons of other books, but I think that this is the most popular. And here's the table of contents. Has, you know, taking charge of yourself, first love, you don't need their approval, breaking free from the past, the useless emotions, guilt and worry, exploring the unknown, breaking the barrier of convention, the justice trap, putting an end to procrastination now, declare your independence, farewell to anger, portrait of a person who has eliminated all erroneous zones. That's the table of contents for this book, and I'm excited to read it. I'm actually a big I don't know, I don't want to say a big fan of self-development books, but I enjoy selective self-development books. I think that there's, you know, something to be learned and applied from pretty much any book that you can read. And yeah, that's the end of my book haul. I know most of these books were non-fiction. I hope that this video wasn't terribly boring. I tend to ramble and get distracted. If you're still watching this video, thank you so much. You have no idea how much it means. I'm just trying to create the type of ASMR content that I like to watch, which is just whisper rambles, talking about books, light triggers, I guess, like a little bit of tapping, a little bit of word repetition. I don't know. So if you have any requests, please comment them below. No guarantees that I'll actually do it, but you know, yeah. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good night or a good day. Bye.